Thomas Art Hale, age 57. They say you really find out who people are when you're at your lowest. Lying in that hospital bed, tubes in my arm, the left side of my body barely responding, I never imagined that a text message, not a phone call, not a visit, not even a damn email, would change the course of everything I'd spent 3 decades building. I was 57 years old, a senior logistics manager at a major manufacturing firm, 29 years of loyal service, the kind of man who skipped family events for emergency shifts, who fixed other people's mistakes without ever asking for credit, who stayed late when others walked out, and yet, when I suffered a stroke, collapsed alone in the company parking lot, and was rushed to the ER, my loyalty expired before I even got home. It happened on a Wednesday. I remember because the sun was blinding through the hospital window, and the nurse had just helped me sit up for the first time in 4 days. My speech was slurred, my balance was shot, and I couldn't feel much on my left side. But I was fighting. I was going to recover. I had to. Then my phone buzzed. I looked down, and there it was. "Hey Thomas, hope you're recovering well. Unfortunately, with your absence and restructuring, we've decided to let you go effective immediately. All the best." No name, no apology, just that. It was from Rachel, the new HR manager, 20-something, cold as steel, never looked me in the eye once since she was hired, the same one I helped onboard last year when she didn't even know how our invoicing system worked. Let me say it again. I was fired while in a hospital bed, recovering from a stroke. No severance, no discussion, no warning, just discarded, like I was already dead. The rage didn't come immediately. At first, I just stared at the screen. My hand trembled, not from the stroke, but from something deeper. I tried to speak but choked on my own breath. It wasn't just the job, it was what the job represented. Purpose, legacy, dignity, the life I gave them in exchange for stability, for the promise that loyalty mattered, and they threw it away while I was still learning how to walk again. Later that night, when my son Michael visited, he noticed I wasn't myself. "Dad, you okay?" I nodded slightly. "They fired me," I muttered, my words slow, thick, almost broken. He blinked, thought he misunderstood. "What?" I showed him the message. He read it, his jaw clenched. "Are you kidding me? After everything? No, no. We're not letting them get away with this." I wanted to tell him to leave it alone. I wanted to just move on, heal, forget it, but something inside me said no. They didn't just fire me, they tried to erase me, and that was something I couldn't allow. I spent the next few weeks focusing on rehab, not just for my body, but for my mind, my spirit, my name. I worked with therapists, ate better, rested, listened, learned. I read everything I could about employment law, wrongful termination, disability discrimination. I contacted an old friend, Andrew, a labor attorney I'd once helped during a crisis at the warehouse. And slowly, something inside me started to rise. Not just anger, strategy. They thought I was too weak to fight back. They thought I'd disappear quietly. They forgot who the hell I was. What they didn't know, I had access to internal records. I had emails, copies, and receipts. I had colleagues, loyal ones, who were disgusted by what happened. And more than anything, I had time. Because they gave it to me. They took my job, but they handed me something even more dangerous in return. A mission, and I was just getting started. I wasn't the kind of man who believed in revenge. At least, not before the stroke. Not before they took everything I built and dumped it with a text message like yesterday's trash. Not before they tried to pretend like I'd never existed, as if 29 years of loyalty could be swept under the rug with the words restructuring and absence. It wasn't just personal anymore. It was war, and I wasn't going to play fair, not because I wanted to break rules, but because I knew they had. Step 1, building a case. My son Michael, God bless that boy, printed every email, performance review, payroll slip, and HR document he could access through the employee portal. He even helped me log into my company inbox, which they had forgotten to deactivate, their first mistake, and forwarded everything to a private account. What I found was a goldmine. Emails between executives discussing my upcoming health issues weeks before the stroke. Messages where Rachel, the HR manager, said I was likely too expensive to keep and that the clean break during his medical leave would avoid drama. One even said, "Let's just remove him before he becomes a liability. Stroke recovery could take forever." Liability, that's what I had become to them. Not a man, not a human being, just a line item in a budget. What they didn't know, they had already created the perfect case for wrongful termination, disability discrimination, and retaliation. I showed it all to Andrew, the labor attorney I had helped years ago when he lost his warehouse job after an injury. He didn't just take the case, he brought a team, and they weren't interested in a settlement. They wanted to make this public. Step 2, the inside man. Remember how I said not everyone at the company agreed with what happened? Meet Javier, quiet, loyal, head of IT, and one of the only men I trusted at that company. He and I had worked together for over a decade, and when I got sick, he was one of the few who checked in on me privately. One day, he visited me at home with a USB drive. I shouldn't be doing this, he said, but they crossed a line. You need to see it for yourself. Inside were meeting recordings, some legal, some not so much. Conversations where executives laughed about firing me during my recovery. He won't fight back. He can barely speak right now. If he tries to sue, we'll just bury him in paperwork. I didn't say a word while listening. I just stared at the screen, feeling something deep inside me settle. Not peace, not anger either. Conviction. They thought they could erase me. Now, I was going to erase their illusion of safety. Step 3, a public story. Andrew's team knew what they were doing. They drafted the lawsuit, but we didn't file it right away. First, we went public. We gave an exclusive interview to a mid-size business ethics blog, the kind that lives for David versus Goliath stories. The piece was titled, Fired from His Hospital Bed, How One Man's Stroke Became a Corporate HR Opportunity. We provided emails, audio snippets cleaned of any sensitive info, and most of all, my face. Still partially paralyzed. Still recovering. Still standing. The article blew up. By the end of the week, it had been shared over 4,000 times. My former company's HR page was flooded with angry comments. The local news reached out. So did 2 national outlets. Suddenly, my story wasn't mine alone. It belonged to everyone who had ever been discarded while sick, broken, grieving, or recovering. Step 4, the first strike. We officially filed the lawsuit the next week. Wrongful termination, disability discrimination, hostile work environment, and punitive damages. My attorney's letter to the company's legal team included a list of demands, not just compensation, but policy reform, a public apology, and mandatory ethics training for senior leadership. Their response? Silence. 4-5 days. Then, a settlement offer. They wanted to bury everything. Quietly. With money. But I wasn't after a paycheck anymore. I wanted their name to mean something again, not power, but shame. So I rejected the first offer. And the second. I told my lawyer, we're not done until the world sees what they did to a man who gave them everything. And I meant it. A new version of me. Meanwhile, I kept getting stronger. Speech therapy, physical therapy, long days, painful progress. But I could walk now. My hand could write again. My mind was clearer than it had been in years. What they thought would be the end of me became the beginning. I started writing my own memoir, not a sob story, but a survival one. About aging in the workplace, medical bias, the illusion of corporate loyalty. I called it Fired and Alive, the stroke that saved my life. I wasn't just healing anymore. I was evolving. For most of my adult life, I thought justice was something that arrived quietly, after paperwork, courtrooms, apologies whispered behind closed doors. But now I know better. Sometimes justice doesn't whisper. Sometimes, it roars. And when it does, it echoes through marble-floored lobbies, sterile boardrooms, and corporate inboxes that suddenly go dark from panic. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about the rot that festers behind HR walls. The kind that smiles during annual reviews, says your family, and then sends a text to fire you while you're hooked to force in a hospital bed. And now, that rot had a spotlight on it. The article that broke them, the business ethics blog that first ran my story, it had quietly partnered with an investigative journalist from a major outlet. The woman's name was Delilah Chan, and she wasn't just a reporter, she was a scalpel in a world full of blunt hammers. She interviewed ex-employees, quiet ones, scared ones, and one of them, Stacy, a former HR assistant, gave her everything. Internal memos, Slack chats, off-the-record conversations about firing people with chronic illnesses before they hit long-term disability thresholds, policies that weren't official, but were understood. A spreadsheet labeled, risk tier, medical and performance flags. My name was on it. So were 9 others. The article dropped on a Monday morning. By lunchtime, the company's LinkedIn page was locked, their Glassdoor flooded, and the CEO's name was trending on X, not for innovation, but for exploitation. The headline read, Profit over Patients, inside the company accused of targeting sick employees, and under it, a photo of me, standing with a cane, half smiling, in front of the hospital where I learned I was no longer useful. The first phone call they tried calling me, Not Rachel from HR, not legal, the CEO himself, James E. Whitmore. I let it ring 5 times before answering. "Mr. Hale," he said, calm, rehearsed. "Let me start by saying how deeply sorry I am for the way things were handled. It does not reflect the values of this organization." I laughed, not politely, not sarcastically, a real, guttural laugh, the kind I hadn't let out in months. "Save it for the deposition, James." Silence. Then he tried again. "We'd like to meet privately, to resolve this like professionals." I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. "You already made your move. Now it's my turn. I'm not just fighting for me anymore. I'm fighting for every person you made feel small, disposable, invisible." Click. I hung up. The insiders begin to talk. Once the article went viral, more dominoes started to fall. 3 former managers came forward with similar stories, employees being quietly pushed out after cancer diagnoses, sudden mental health leaves, even pregnancy-related complications. Every one of them had been treated like I was replaced, disrespected, discarded. The company tried to spin it. PR statements, carefully worded apologies, announcements of internal reviews. But it was too late. They underestimated me, and now they'd underestimated the world watching. The day of the board meeting, through Andrew, my attorney, I received word that the board of directors would be holding an emergency internal meeting to decide the fate of the company's leadership. One of the directors, a woman named Eliza Morrison, who'd lost her brother to workplace malpractice, asked to meet with me privately the night before. We met at a quiet restaurant. She looked me in the eye, honest and direct. "I read everything. And I believe you. I believed every word since I saw the message they sent you in the hospital." I asked her why she wanted to help. She sighed. "Because I've seen people like you get run over by machines like this, and I've stayed quiet before. I'm not doing that again." That night, she promised me, if the vote went the right way, change would begin, not just for me, but for the others, for the ones who didn't survive long enough to fight back. Where I stand now as I write this, the lawsuit is still active. The investigation is ongoing. The board vote is days away. But something happened that matters more than all of it. I got my voice back. Not just my ability to speak, but my power to say, "I deserve to be treated like a human being. So does everyone else." The meeting was set for 9 a.m. sharp. The board of directors, 8 men and women, most of whom had never once looked me in the eye during my 29 years at the company, were gathering behind tall, smoked glass inside the corporate headquarters. But I wasn't invited. No, I was just the reason they were meeting. Outside, a small crowd had gathered. Not protesters, not press, employees, former ones. Some carried signs. Some stood silently. Others held copies of the article that had gone viral just days before. One woman, maybe in her 30s, was holding a sign that broke me a little. "I buried my dad before he could fight back. I'm here for him, and for Thomas Hale." It took everything in me not to cry right there. Inside the glass walls, what I knew later, from the transcript leaked by one of the board members, was this: the room was split. Half of the board wanted to contain the damage, fire the CEO, offer a settlement, quiet the noise. The other half, they wanted to bury me, paint me as unstable, as an employee with declining health and performance. That's when Eliza Morrison stood up and did something none of them expected. She played the audio. Yes, the one Javier had given me, the one where HR and legal referred to me as a budget casualty, joked about clean breaks, and predicted I'd be too mentally impaired to understand what had happened. One board member got up and left the room in silence. Another, after the audio ended, said only, "We are not surviving this intact unless we clean house now." Then came the vote. 5-3. Effective immediately, Rachel Morgan, HR manager, terminated for unethical conduct. 2 senior executives involved in the internal scheme suspended pending investigation. James E. Whitmore, CEO, to step down by the end of the quarter. The phone call I didn't expect. 2 hours later, I got a call. Not from the board, not from legal, from Rachel. At first, I almost didn't answer. But something in me, maybe the need for closure, maybe curiosity, said pick up. Her voice was cold, dry, like defeat soaked into her throat. I just wanted to say, "Congratulations." I didn't speak. She continued, "You won. You got what you wanted." Now I spoke. "No, Rachel. What I wanted was not to be fired while I was trying to learn how to speak again. What I wanted was to not be treated like trash after 29 years. What I wanted was respect, but I'll take accountability instead." She said nothing for a moment. Then quietly, "They told me to do it. They said it was just business." I laughed, not from humor, from exhaustion. You had a choice. You always had a choice. Click. I didn't wait for a response. I ended the call, because sometimes the only apology you ever get is knowing they'll never forget your name. Something strange happened next. By the end of the week, something I never expected began to happen. Other companies started calling me, not to offer pity jobs, to offer consulting roles, speaking engagements. Suddenly, I was being invited to speak at HR conferences, employee rights summits, even business schools. My voice, the same one I had to rebuild in speech therapy, was now being asked to speak for others. One email stood out: Mr. Hale, your story gave my team the courage to report unsafe policies in our own company. We're changing because you refuse to be silent. Thank you. Maya, HR analyst. I stood in front of the building one last time. Just me, my cane, and a leather-bound notebook I had carried through every therapy session. I looked up at the building, that cold, glass and metal tower where I had given my soul for almost 3 decades. And I didn't feel pain anymore. I didn't feel revenge. I felt done. I turned and walked away, but not before saying quietly, you tried to erase me. Now I'm the name they remember when they rebuild everything you destroyed. People think stories like mine end with a check, an apology, and walking away with a quiet sense of justice. But my story didn't end there. It kept growing. It grew into every email I got from a burnt-out father who was let go after a heart attack, every HR rep who whispered thank you as I passed them at events, every ex-employee who told me, you gave us language, you gave us a face. And now, months after the boardroom verdict and the CEO's fall, I wasn't just surviving. I was building something. A book born from silence while recovering from my stroke. I had started writing in a black leather-bound notebook, half therapy, half habit. Scribbles, memories, questions like, how did we get here? When did loyalty become leverage? What happens to the workers who fall behind the machine? After the article went viral, a small independent publisher contacted me and said, you should finish that book, and we'll help you share it. 6 weeks later, I finished the manuscript. Fired and Alive: What I Learned About Power, Pain, and People After a Stroke. The first chapter was raw, word for word, the text message I received while hooked to and for. The last chapter? Hope. Not because everything was perfect, but because I'd found purpose in the wreckage. A strange invitation. I was invited to speak at a national HR summit, the kind of event where executives sip $8 lattes while talking about culture and innovation. The topic? What HR gets wrong about humanity. I almost said no. But my son, Michael, sat me down and said, Dad, if they are asking you to speak, it means they are finally listening. So I said yes. And I walked into that room wearing the same suit they saw me in on my last company retreat, except now, I wasn't a manager. I was a mirror. I looked out at the room of polished professionals, all sitting upright, curious and uncomfortable, and said, if you're in HR, in leadership, in management, let me tell you something uncomfortable. You will never know who the most loyal person in your company is, until you betray them. The room went silent, and then they started to write. Not tweets, notes, because this wasn't a scandal anymore. It was a lesson, a letter from someone I never expected. 2 months after the summit, I received a letter in a plain white envelope. Handwritten, no return address, just a name at the bottom. James E. Whitmore, former CEO, the man who let them fire me while I was learning to walk again. It read, Thomas, I've read your book twice. I've seen the interviews. I've listened to your talks. And I've had to confront the fact that I led a company where this could happen, and I let it happen. I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to know. I finally see the damage we caused. It took losing everything to see you clearly. You were never the weak one. I was. James the first. Read it once. Then I put it in a drawer, not to forget, but to remember how even power, when stripped of its protection, can learn to whisper sorry. The final move. 6 months after the lawsuit, after the book, after the summit, I made one final move. I created something called the Quiet Fighters Fund, a non-profit that provides legal aid for low-income workers facing medical-related terminations, workplace advocacy for employees with chronic illness or disability, scholarships for the children of workers who died while employed by companies that denied them care. I funded the first $75,000 myself, out of the settlement money, because revenge ends with a verdict, but justice starts with rebuilding. Closing thoughts. The man they tried to erase. They tried to fire me like I was a name on a spreadsheet, a liability, a sick man who couldn't fight back. But here I am, not just healed, but heard, not just vindicated, but visible, not just fired, but free. They'll hire replacements, rebuild policies, rebrand the logo, but they'll never forget the year they fired a man from his hospital bed. and learned the hard way that some men don't stay silent, even when they can barely speak. I thought it would end with the book, or maybe with the lawsuit, or the summit speech, but it didn't, because when the noise quieted, the applause, the headlines, the cameras, something unexpected remained. People kept coming. Emails from strangers, phone calls, messages in person from nurses, mechanics, teachers, even HR reps, all telling me the same thing: your story is mine, too. I just didn't know how to fight. You gave me permission to speak. I hadn't just lit a fire, I'd become a lighthouse. And now, I couldn't just walk away. The non-profit Takes Off the Quiet Fighters Fund had started with one man, one mission, and a few $1,000s. 6 months in, it had grown to 14 active cases across 5 states, a waiting list of over 200 terminated workers, 2 volunteer law firms, 1 HR reform partnership with a national grocery chain. The fund had caught the attention of Forbes, who called it a grassroots movement, giving fired and medically sidelined workers the legal firepower corporations never expected them to have. We weren't just helping people get compensation anymore, we were helping them stand back up. A surprising offer. That's when the phone rang again. Only this time, it wasn't a former CEO or lawyer. It was a U.S. Senator's office. They'd read about the fund, the book, the case. They were drafting a bill called the Fair Reinstatement and Medical Leave Protection Act and wanted me to consult as a witness, speak on the floor of the Senate, and possibly join a National Workforce Ethics Advisory Council. I blinked at the phone like it had grown wings. You want me, the guy you fired while I was learning to hold a spoon again, to stand in front of Congress? The voice on the line chuckled. Exactly that guy. The choice I didn't see coming, but life, funny as it is, doesn't give without testing you. 1 week after the Senate call, I got another offer. A startup in Boston. A medical logistics company. Small, scrappy, hungry for someone with my expertise. We can build it the right way, Mr. Hale, the CEO said. No corporate games. No silent terminations. Full protection for people like you. Come build it with us. They wanted me to be Chief Operations Officer, a position I'd once dreamed of, before the stroke, before the betrayal, before the rage. Now, I had a foot in 2 futures. One where I'd help thousands from the outside, with advocacy, writing, non-profit leadership, and one where I could finally build the kind of company I used to believe in. A conversation that settled my heart. I went for a walk with my son Michael. He'd been there through it all: the stroke, the lawsuit, the late-night email printing marathons, the interviews, the therapy. What should I do? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he asked me, which version of you do you think survived the stroke, Dad? The fighter? Or the builder? I was quiet. Then I said, maybe both. He smiled. Then maybe it's not a choice. Maybe it's a new chapter. So here's what I did. I joined the advisory council. I kept building the Quiet Fighters Fund, hiring a full-time director to expand nationally, and I accepted the Boston offer, but only under 3 conditions. All workers, regardless of status or seniority, would receive full short-term and long-term disability coverage. No employee could be terminated while hospitalized without a full legal and medical review, signed by a third-party auditor. My first official act as coup would be to give a talk titled "What My Stroke Taught Me About Loyalty." They agreed. Every word. Closure, but never silence. It's been over a year since I got that text message in the hospital bed. I still carry it on my phone, not because it haunts me anymore, but because it reminds me that the weak don't stay weak forever, that sometimes you have to be thrown out to realize you were meant to build something on your own terms, that your voice, when recovered, can echo farther than it ever did when you were silent and loyal. I was fired, I was sick, I was written off, and now, I write the rules. The office in Boston was nothing like the old one. No glass tower, no corporate silence, just a converted brick building in a quiet part of town, where sunlight hit real windows and the kitchen smelled like fresh coffee, not burnt anxiety. People smiled when they walked past you in the hallway, not because they were paid to, but because they meant it. For the first time in nearly 30 years, I stepped into a workplace without a tight chest or a plastic smile. And yet, I kept waiting for something to go wrong. Because somewhere deep inside me, the part that had been betrayed still whispered, don't relax, don't trust it yet. You know how fast they can flip. But months passed. No one got fired without notice. Our leave policy went public, full transparency. I made sure every temp, intern, and entry-level worker had the same short-term protection I'd never gotten. We even hired 2 former Quiet Fighters Fund recipients, people who'd once been discarded like me. And still, I was waiting. Because no company is perfect, not even one I helped build. And then, sure enough, the test came. A junior warehouse employee named Caleb was rushed to the hospital mid-shift. Heart palpitations, shortness of breath. He'd never disclosed any medical issues, he didn't even know he had any. When the report hit my desk, I froze. My old life came flooding back. The text, the silence, the restructuring. It all washed over me in one terrible, familiar wave. But this time, it was my call. I walked to the HR desk myself and said 5 words. Full leave. No discussion. Understood. They nodded. No resistance. No delays. No whispered meetings. I personally called Caleb's sister that night. She cried, not because she was scared, but because she couldn't believe a company would wait, not to fire, but to support. That night, I sat in my small office, lights off, thinking to myself, this is how we fix it, one Caleb at a time. But life isn't that simple, is it? 2 days later, I received a secure, anonymous email. No subject line, just one file attached. It was labeled internal_corp_omega_2022.zip omega. My old employer. I almost deleted it. I was tired of the past. I'd done my fighting. My case was over. My book was out. I was done with that chapter of my life. But curiosity doesn't die easy. I opened it. Inside were dozens of internal reports, PowerPoint decks, spreadsheets, and meeting notes. They weren't from my era. These were newer, recent. As recent as 4 months ago, they showed that Omega hadn't stopped. They'd simply gone quiet. Their risk tier policy had been rebranded as Workforce Resilience Forecasting. Their terminations were now bundled inside early retirement packages. And worst of all, one document, dated after my case had settled, showed a projection medical-related turnover savings by Q3, $3.2 million. I felt sick. They hadn't learned a thing. They just got smarter at hiding it. The last file was a whistleblower statement. Unnamed. Mr. Hale, I don't know you, but I read everything. I watched what they did to you, and now they are doing it again, quieter this time, but just as cruel. I'm sending this because someone has to speak, and I can't, but you can. I sat still for a long time after reading that. Not angry, not even shocked, just cold, because I thought I'd finished the war. I thought I'd torn their foundation apart, but they just built a new one beneath the rubble. That night, I didn't sleep. I went to the office at 5 a.m., made coffee with shaking hands, and sat in the same chair where I'd once told my team, we're doing this the right way. And I thought to myself, maybe the right way isn't enough. Maybe the only way to kill a machine like that is to drag it into the sun. But exposing them again? That would mean going public. Again. Opening wounds. Risking lawsuits. Putting myself and my company back into the fire. Was I ready for that? Was I willing to be the face of this fight all over again? A knock on my door pulled me from the spiral. It was my assistant. She smiled softly. There's someone here to see you. Who? Her smile faltered. She says her name is Rachel. I froze. Rachel Morgan. The HR manager who fired me by text message. The one who fell with the CEO. The one I never expected to see again. And now, she was standing outside my office. After all this time, I looked at the whistleblower file again. Then back at the door, and quietly, I said, send her in. She walked in like someone trying not to be recognized, not just by others, by herself. Rachel Morgan wasn't the polished, perfectly postured HR executive I remembered. No suit, no heels. Her posture carried weight now, the kind that doesn't come from age, but from guilt or fear. I stood up out of instinct, then regretted it. The scar in my back from the stroke twinged like it always did when I moved too quickly. She noticed. She always noticed things. She looked at me, the cane, the weight I'd lost, the aging in my face, and her mouth twitched. Not into a smile, but something closer to shame. You look different, she said, softly. I am different, I replied. She sat down without asking. I watched her for a moment. Part of me didn't want to speak. Let the silence punish her, but I wasn't that man anymore. So, I said finally, why are you here? Rachel looked down, then pulled out a folder. Not a laptop. Not a phone, a folder, paper, printed, handheld, like it mattered more that way. I don't expect you to forgive me. I didn't come for that. I stayed quiet. She pushed the folder across the desk. You need to see this. I opened it. Inside were internal reports, emails, an org chart, and a list, a long one. At the top, employee downsizing forecast Q4 medical risk flag tier. I froze. It was the same kind of list I'd seen before. But this time, the list wasn't theoretical. It had names. Some I recognized, former co-workers. Others were new. I looked at her. What is this? Rachel exhaled. They never stopped, Thomas. You were right, even after the settlement, even after the press, they just buried it deeper. I pointed at the logo on the top of the page. And you're still working with them? I was, she said, until I leaked this. I stared at her. You're the whistleblower. She nodded once. I saw what we did to you, and for a while, I convinced myself I was just following orders. But it didn't stop. It got worse. The new leadership, they are smarter. They've automated the risk assessments. AI scans medical leave patterns. They flag people before they even disclose diagnoses. My stomach turned. Rachel leaned forward. I helped build the system. I stayed because I thought I could control the damage. I was wrong. Now I want to destroy it. I watched her closely. I didn't trust her, not fully, but something in her face had changed. She wasn't here for forgiveness. She was here for war. They are planning a mass restructuring in Q4, she said. They've already selected the targets. People with MS, lupus, mental health conditions, cancer survivors. It's going to be sanitized, legal, and catastrophic. I shook my head. Why now? Why come to me? Her voice dropped to a whisper. Because I know you'll do what I'm too afraid to. I know you'll go public. Silence hung between us, heavier than anything. Why don't you go public? I asked. Rachel looked at me, eyes glassy. Because they know things about me, and if they release it, I lose everything. My license, my kid, everything. It hit me harder than I expected. She had a kid now. She used to be the storm. Now she was sheltering someone. She stood up. The documents are yours. I've made copies. I left everything else out of it. Nothing traces back to me. But you need to move fast. They are finalizing terminations next month. As she reached the door, she stopped. I did a terrible thing to you, she said. I still replay it sometimes. That message. I wrote it in a meeting while pretending to take notes. She turned, just enough to meet my eyes. You deserved more than that. You always did. Then she left, and I was alone again, only now, I wasn't holding anger. I was holding proof. Real, heavy, undeniable proof that the same machine I thought I'd helped dismantle had kept spinning in the dark. And this time, it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone still stuck inside that system. Everyone too sick, too scared, too cornered to speak. I looked at the folder, then I picked up my phone and dialed. Not my lawyer, not the press. Delila Chan, the journalist. She answered on the second ring. Mr. Hale? I have something, I said, and you're going to want to see it in person. She was silent for half a beat. Then, how bad is it? I looked at the list of names, the red flags, the medical notes, the projected savings. It's everything we missed last time. And this time, I'm not just telling my story. I paused. I'm telling theirs. Delila Chan arrived the next day with a satchel full of equipment and eyes that no longer scanned, they searched. Since our first story, she'd risen to national prominence, but she didn't act like it. When she walked into my office, she didn't shake my hand like a journalist meeting a source. She hugged me like an old soldier returning to the front lines. You look tired, she said, smiling, but sharp. I'm older, wiser, still angry. Good, she said. You'll need all three. I handed her the folder Rachel had given me. She sat, flipped through the documents, and didn't speak for a full 10 minutes. Just page after page, name after name, each one marked with a red tag: high medical risk, watch for extended leave, potential liability, recommend early exit. Some of the notes were handwritten. Terminate after Q4 benefits paid out. Flag as culturally combative. Mental health red flags, prepare HR case. When she reached the bottom of the stack, she looked up, her expression unreadable. They are not just skirting the law, she said. They are building around it. I nodded. And we can't beat them with an op-ed this time. No, she said. This time, we make it too big to ignore. The next 2 weeks were a blur. Delila and her team began contacting the names on the list. Quietly, carefully, each one was asked a single question: have you been approached about early retirement, job reassignment, or contract termination due to health? 36 responded. 22 agreed to speak. 9 had already been laid off, under vague circumstances. 4 had lost access to insurance coverage days before critical surgeries. And 1, a former financial controller, offered something Delila hadn't expected: a copy of the payout algorithm. It was an internal program. Cold, efficient, and brutal. It calculated how much Omega could save by letting sick employees go before their conditions triggered major benefit costs. It included long-term disability averages, average lawsuit settlements, and, in red, expected media risk score. It literally priced out human silence. Delilah looked at me as we reviewed it in my living room one night. "This isn't a story," she whispered. "It's a blueprint for corporate cruelty." I said nothing, just stared at the screen, because deep down, I knew this was my reckoning. They thought firing me would erase me. Instead, it sharpened me. We launched the story exactly 1 year after I received that text in my hospital bed. It wasn't a blog post this time. Not a niche publication. Not a viral tweet. This time, it hit the front page of the Washington Post, The Algorithm of Silence, Inside Omega's Secret Plan to Terminate Sick Employees Before the System Catches Them, by Delilah Chan, with Thomas Hale. Within 48 hours, a Senate committee announced an emergency hearing. Omega's stock dropped 27%. Whistleblowers across the country began submitting similar documents from other companies, and "We are not liabilities" trend across every major platform. But none of that moved me as much as one message I received in my inbox. It was from a name I hadn't seen in years. Carter Mallory, my old boss's boss, a man who once gave me a loyalty plaque, then forgot my name when I was terminated. "Thomas, I've read the article. I've seen the documents. I want you to know I didn't know, not all of it. Not this. If you're willing, I'd like to talk, not to defend, just to listen. You said something, years ago, that stuck with me. The test of a leader isn't what he builds, it's what he protects. I failed that test, but I'm listening now." I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, because I didn't need to. In the weeks that followed, the fallout spread. Omega's board was subpoenaed. The CEO resigned. Rachel, despite her fears, was invited to testify privately, protected by whistleblower immunity. The algorithm itself was banned by a new federal labor order. And the Quiet Fighters Fund? We received $2 million in donations, in 72 hours. Not from politicians, from people, from the workers, from the sick, from the fired, from the families who buried someone too early because they were dropped by a company who saw them as a risk. I spoke at the Senate hearing a month later. No cane this time. I stood, shoulders square, suit pressed, voice strong, and I looked the room dead in the eyes and said, I was terminated while recovering from a stroke because I cost too much to keep alive. But the truth is, people like me, we're not burdens. We're the reason you have a company at all. And if you forget that again, I promise, I'll be back. Stronger, louder, with more names behind me. There was no applause, just silence. The kind that means they heard you. Victory is a strange thing. After the Senate hearing, the noise died down. Omega was bleeding out in the media, cornered by lawsuits, internal resignations, and a class action that would take years to settle. And yet, there was a kind of uneasy quiet hanging in the air. For the first time in a long time, I woke up to no press requests, no urgent calls, no angry voicemails from PR teams. Just birds, coffee, and my own breath. Michael came over one morning, my son, and found me sitting on the porch. You did it, he said. I nodded slowly. Feels like I should feel finished. But you don't. No, I said, because I'm not. I still had the fund. Still had my role at the Boston startup. Still received handwritten letters from sick workers in places I'd never been, thanking me for giving them a voice. I wasn't tired. I was watchful. Which is probably why I noticed it so quickly. It started small. A report on my desk showing a delay in benefit approvals for 2 warehouse employees. I flagged it immediately. HR blamed a vendor backlog. 2 days later, another file appeared, an internal cost-saving proposal, unsigned, recommending we reevaluate the long-term fiscal burden of permanent part-time staff on extended medical leave. The wording was too familiar. It echoed the same language Omega had used. I felt it in my bones. But this wasn't Omega. This was my company now. The one I helped build from scratch. The one with policies I personally wrote. The one whose mission statement I crafted in a hospital room while learning to walk again. I called a board meeting. Quiet. Internal. Off calendar. And that's when I found out the truth. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from someone inside my team. More specifically, from Daniel Crisp, my handpicked coup successor. The man I mentored. The man I defended when investors doubted his age. The man who gave an emotional speech at our first ethics summit about how his mother was forced out of her job after a cancer diagnosis. He had co-authored the memo, and he had gone behind my back to propose a plan to streamline personnel efficiency for post-acquisition viability. In plain language, quietly isolate sick employees in non-essential roles so they'd eventually resign on their own. No terminations. No lawsuits. Just silence. I confronted him that night. We didn't raise voices. I just laid the document on the table and waited. Daniel stared at it, then at me. Thomas, I wasn't trying to repeat Omega. This is different. Say that again, I said, barely able to contain the rage in my chest. He sighed. We're a company now, not a protest movement. We've got 2 rounds of funding coming, and our burn rate is. I stood up so fast my chair almost fell over. Don't you dare talk to me about numbers like they justify betrayal. You sat in every meeting. You watched what they did to me. You gave that speech about your mother. She died broke. Thomas, he shouted suddenly, because no one protected the business that paid her. And maybe if they'd acted sooner, if they'd made hard calls earlier, she wouldn't have been left with nothing. Silence. He didn't cry. I didn't yell. We just stood there, 2 men caught in a quiet war of grief and ideals. Then he said something that shook me to my core. You didn't build this company to save people. You built it to redeem yourself. And now, you're using it like a pulpit instead of a platform. I could have fired him on the spot. I didn't, because he wasn't entirely wrong. I had built this company to redeem something in me, my past, my name, my silence. But I also built it for the people who couldn't fight for themselves. And I wasn't going to let anyone, not even someone I loved like a son, destroy that. The next morning, I called an emergency board meeting. And for the first time, I told the full story, not just of Omega, but of my internal war. The stroke, the text, the rage, the reason I fought so hard to make this company different. And then I said the thing that hurt the most. If you believe in Daniel's vision, a profitable, balanced business that slowly backs away from the fight we promised to take, then you should remove me. But if you believe in the company we swore we'd build when we had nothing, then we need to remember who we are, right now, before it's too late. They voted. It was close, but they kept me. And Daniel? He didn't wait to be escorted out. He just nodded once, and left. No words. Just a long, slow walk out of the room. That night, I stood alone in the same office where I once received the whistleblower folder, and for the first time in years, I cried. Not because I was sad, not because I'd been betrayed, but because I finally understood the full weight of leadership. It's not just about protecting people from the enemy. It's about protecting them from the temptation to become the enemy, even when they mean well, even when it's someone you trust. After Daniel's departure, the company felt like a wound slowly stitching itself closed. But the scar reminded me every day that even good intentions can cut deep. Then, one afternoon, an unexpected email landed in my inbox. From a man named Victor Langston, CEO of Titan Corp, a global conglomerate worth billions, known for acquiring promising startups and scaling them to unimaginable heights. The subject line read, "Opportunity for Partnership, Scaling Quiet Fighters Fund Worldwide." I almost deleted it without reading. I'd been burned before by promises wrapped in power plays. But curiosity and hope made me open it. Victor proposed a bold plan. Titan Corp would invest $50 million into the Quiet Fighters Fund, transforming it from a modest non-profit into a global organization with the resources to fight corporate discrimination everywhere. At first glance, it was the answer we'd dreamed of. More money, more reach, more power. But as I read on, the fine print revealed the catch. Titan Corp wanted a controlling interest in the fund. They wanted board seats. They wanted the right to veto any public statements that could harm their business interests. I felt my chest tighten. This wasn't just an investment. It was a takeover. I called Delilah immediately. Her voice was cautious. "It sounds like a dream, but you know how these deals go. We'll lose everything we fought for," I said. "Our independence, our voice, unless you set the terms." That night, I sat alone in my office, staring at the email. $50 million could change thousands of lives. But at what cost? I thought about Daniel's betrayal, about how power could twist even the best intentions. I thought about Rachel, about the courage it took to stand up, even when it meant risking everything. And then I thought about the people still out there, waiting for a champion. I realized then that legacy wasn't about money, it was about trust. The next day, I called Victor. I didn't say no, I didn't say yes. I said, "Let's talk." And we did. We negotiated 4 weeks. Every clause, every word, every nuance. I demanded, the fund remains fully autonomous. No Titan Corp executives on the board. Complete editorial freedom for any public statements or investigations. A commitment to transparency, with annual independent audits. Protections for whistleblowers within Titan Corp and its subsidiaries. Victor was surprised but impressed. After months of talks, we reached a deal. Not a takeover, a partnership. When I announced the expansion of the Quiet Fighters Fund at our annual gala, the room erupted in applause. I stood on stage, my voice steady. "This fund is not just a symbol of resistance, it is a beacon of hope. but hope without accountability is just a dream. So, we make a promise today to fight not for profit or power, but for the dignity and respect every worker deserves. We will hold corporations accountable, no exceptions, no compromises. As the crowd cheered, I caught Delilah's eye in the back row. She smiled, because we both knew the fight was far from over, but now we had the firepower to keep going. The first few months after the Titan Corp partnership felt like a victory march. Quiet Fighters Fund expanded rapidly. New offices opened in Chicago, Seattle, London, and Toronto. Our investigative team doubled. Grants were awarded to dozens of smaller advocacy groups worldwide. The message resonated louder and farther than I ever imagined. But victory, as I had learned, is often a fragile thing. It started with whispers. Internal leaks from Titan Corp subsidiaries claiming retaliation against employees who reported discrimination or medical bias. Anonymous tips to Delilah's team about subtle contract clauses restricting union organizing. Emails from partners concerned that the fund's investigations were being quietly watered down. Certain high-profile cases mysteriously dropped. At first, I pushed back. No, this wasn't happening. We had safeguards. We had transparency. We had power. But then, the calls came. From former employees of companies Titan Corp had recently acquired. Stories almost identical to the ones I'd heard years ago at Omega. Employees sidelined, demoted, or pressured to quit because of their medical conditions. And the worst part? Some of these companies were key Titan Corp subsidiaries, companies that held direct influence over the fund's biggest donors. One night, I sat with Delilah in my office, the city light spilling through the windows. "We're fighting a hydra," I said. She nodded. "Cut off one head, another grows." I stared at the pile of reports on my desk. Documentation, evidence, emails with threats disguised as business advice. Then I realized this wasn't just about corporate greed. It was about corruption within the very system we'd trusted to protect us. Titan Corp's money had opened doors, but it had also shackled us. I thought of the promises we made during negotiations. The safeguards that, on paper, should have prevented exactly this. But promises are only as strong as those who keep them. I knew what I had to do. I called an emergency board meeting. My voice was calm but firm. "We've become what we fought against," I said. "We cannot allow the Quiet Fighters Fund to be a shield for injustice masked by corporate power." There were gasps, questions, voices pleading for caution, but I held the floor. "I'm recommending an immediate, independent investigation into all Titan Corp subsidiaries connected to the fund. Full transparency, no exceptions." The board chairman, a Titan Corp appointee, objected fiercely. "This could jeopardize the entire partnership," he warned. I stared him down. "If we sacrifice our integrity for money, then we've lost everything. And I'm not willing to do that." The investigation shook the industry. Whistleblowers came forward in droves. Our team uncovered a sprawling web of cover-ups, non-disclosure agreements that silenced victims, and HR policies designed to evade legal scrutiny. One story broke national news: a mid-level manager at a Titan Corp subsidiary who was forced to resign after requesting accommodations for her multiple sclerosis. She lost her healthcare coverage weeks later and tragically passed away before she could find new treatment. The public outrage was immediate. Pressure mounted on Titan Corp. And yet, internally, the fight grew harder. Daniel Crisp remarked during this crisis. He requested a private meeting. I was wary, but I agreed. He arrived with a folder, worn, dog-eared. "Thomas," he said quietly, "I was wrong. You were right. I let fear drive me, but now I want to help." He handed me internal emails exposing the upper management's efforts to suppress investigations. "I've been gathering evidence," he said, "but I can't do this alone." Together, we coordinated with Delilah to release a comprehensive expose, backed by irrefutable proof. The story rocked the foundations of Titan Corp. Stock prices plummeted. Executives resigned in disgrace. Federal regulators launched criminal investigations. Standing in front of the cameras during a press conference, I felt the weight of every hardship, every betrayal, every victory. I spoke with the clarity of a man who'd been through the fire and emerged unbroken. We set out to change the world. But the world fights back in unexpected ways. This battle has tested us as individuals and as a society, but it has also shown us the power of truth, of resilience, and of unwavering commitment to justice. No corporation, no individual, no system is above accountability. We will continue to fight not just for ourselves, but for every worker whose voice has been silenced. The road ahead is long. The scars from this battle run deep. But for the first time, I truly believe change is possible. Because in every corner of this fight, from hospitals to boardrooms, the quiet fighters are standing tall, stronger, louder, unstoppable. As I close this chapter of my life, I am no longer a man defined by loss or betrayal. I am a man defined by purpose, and this purpose will outlive me.